Okay, so let's unpack this because today is Saturday, July 4, 2026, and we are jumping into a deep dive that honestly kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, it's a completely fascinating topic.
Right. And to you listening right now, you are probably someone who really loves figuring out how the world actually works under the hood.
Yeah,
So this is going to be right up your alley.
absolutely.
Because normally when we talk about feeding a pet, there's this sort of expectation of simple mechanics. We tend to view it like a combustion engine,
Oh,
right?
totally, like a car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You look at a cat and you just pour a standard scoop of dry kibble into the bowl and the cat eats it and the engine runs, empty or full. Fuel and energy out.
Which is a very comforting idea. We like standardization.
We really do. But the thing is, the moment you step into the microscopic world of feline digestion, that whole simple engine analogy just completely falls apart. We are looking at a biological landscape that is staggeringly complex.
It is the absolute definition of a dynamic shifting ecosystem.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about a microscopic wilderness that dictates almost every single aspect of an animal's health.
Right. So our mission for today's deep dive is to explore this massive stack of sources. Primarily, we are anchored by this really comprehensive July 2026 guide called The Secret World Beneath the Fur.
Which is an excellent resource.
It really is. And we're also going to look closely at some specific formulation data and visual details for a heavily discussed supplement. It's called A+ Naturals Immunity Blend.
So the core theme that we really need to dismantle today is this myth that veterinary science held onto for literal decades. This entrenched idea that feline digestion is just a one-size-fits-all system.
Right, like every cat processes food the exact same way.
Exactly. And what we're going to reveal is how a cat's specific breed, their hidden genetic predispositions, and their age completely sculpt this invisible metropolis of microbes in their gut. And, more importantly, how targeted precision interventions can actually dramatically extend a cat's healthy lifespan.
This invisible metropolis is, of course, the gut microbiome. And for a long time, the general consensus seemed to treat gut bacteria as just these passive little passengers that only break down food.
Yeah, just tiny digestive helpers.
Right. But this ecosystem, which is trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses with major players like firmicutes and bacteroidates, it does so much more. It actually regulates 70% of the cat's entire immune system.
70%. That's a massive load.
It is, and it produces these things called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. Our sources note that these SCFAs act as chemical messengers that communicate directly with the cat's brain.
But wait, how does that actually work mechanically? Like, how does a byproduct in the colon literally talk to the brain?
Well, so those short-chain fatty acids are incredibly small molecules. And because they are so small, they can actually cross the intestinal barrier, enter the cat's bloodstream, and physically travel all the way up to the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow. So they just float right up there. They do. And once there, they influence the production of neurotransmitters. So the bacteria are literally manufacturing the raw materials that dictate the animal's mood and cognitive function.
That is wild.
It is. And to understand just how individualized this entire ecosystem is, we really have to look at a landmark 2026 study published in NPJ Biofilms and Microbiomes.
Right, the one where they analyze the metagenomes.
Exactly. Researchers analyzed 412 feline metagenomes, meaning they sequenced the entire genetic makeup of all the microbes in 412 different cats. And what they discovered fundamentally changes feline nutrition, because they found two completely distinct feline enterotypes.
Okay, wait, enterotypes. Let's make sure we have a really clear picture of what that actually means.
Right, so think of an enterotype as a distinct community structure. The study identified ETP, which is a gut ecosystem completely dominated by a bacterium called Prevotella.
Okay, Prevotella.
And then there is ETCB, which is enriched for entirely different bacterial families, specifically Collencella and Blautia.
So if I'm connecting this to technology, these two enterotypes are essentially like smartphone operating systems, right? You have iOS versus Android.
That is a perfect analogy.
Because they are both running the cat, but they process data, or in this case, dietary fiber and protein, in fundamentally different ways under the hood. You can't run an iOS app on an Android phone and expect it to work without crashing.
You really can't. And understanding these two operating systems means we can no longer feed or treat every cat identically. An ETP microbiome is optimized differently than an ETCB microbiome.
Right.
Like if you feed a high-protein, zero-carb diet to a cat running the ETCB system, their bacteria might actually struggle to process it efficiently.
Hmm.
The metabolic output, the baseline inflammation levels, the nutrient absorption, it is all dictated by which microbial operating system that specific cat happens to be running.
Which brings us to a massive realization in the research, because if the microbiome is the software, then the cat's physical breed anatomy is the hardware.
Exactly. The hardware.
And extreme hardware changes how the software is forced to run. So let's look at Persians and Himalayans. They have that signature scrunched-in flat face.
The brachycephalic facial structure.
Right, the brachycephalic thing.
We usually associate that flat face with respiratory issues like snoring or, breathing difficulties. But that shortened skull physically alters their gastrointestinal anatomy too. It actually changes the angle and the length of their esophagus.
Wait, really?
Yes. And because of this structural kink, it slows down their gastric emptying.
So the food literally just sits in the stomach and intestines longer than it would in a cat with a normal snout.
Precisely. It just lingers. And that slower transit time completely shifts the fermentation environment in the colon. Because the food is sitting in a warm, moist environment for an extended period, it heavily favors proteolytic bacteria.
Which are the ones that ferment protein, right?
Right. And when protein ferments for too long, it leads to the production of putrefactive metabolites.
Putrefactive meaning like rotting.
Yeah, rotting. In simpler terms, the altered anatomy breeds a specific type of bacteria that produces toxic byproducts, which then cause systemic inflammation throughout the cat's body.
Wait, let me push back on this a little bit because I want to connect a dot here.
Yeah.
I'm looking at our sources, and Persians carry a notoriously high genetic risk for polycystic kidney disease, right? PKD.
Very high risk, yes.
So how does a flat face and slow digestion link to kidney failure? Like, how does the gut physically connect back to the kidneys?
Okay, so we call this the gut-kidney axis, and it operates as this devastating feedback loop. Let's map it out. Kidneys act as the body's filtration system, right?
Right.
As a person's genetically vulnerable kidney function begins to decline, they can't filter water out of the blood properly. Because of this, uremic toxins begin to build up in the bloodstream.
Like a backed up sewer pipe.
Exactly like a backed up sewer. Those toxins circulate in the blood, and eventually they reach the delicate tissue lining the gut. And the toxins physically damage the intestinal barrier. They act almost like microscopic sandpaper on the gut lining.
Oh, man, sounds awful.
It is. And this damage causes gut dysbiosis, which is an overgrowth of bad bacteria. Now, because the gut is damaged, those bad bacteria start generating more uremic toxins as a byproduct of their own metabolism.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and those new toxins leak right back through the damaged gut barrier into the bloodstream and force the failing kidneys to work even harder. It just accelerates the kidney disease.
Wow. So the hardware flaw in their skull slows the food down, which creates a software bug in the bacteria, which produces toxins that completely crash the body's filtration system.
Exactly. It's all connected.
But it's not just physical anatomy that disrupts the gut, right? Sometimes the hardware bug is completely invisible. Like, we're talking genetic mutations having massive downstream effects on the microbial ecology.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the Scottish fold.
The Scottish fold is a perfect example of how an invisible genetic trait reshapes the gut. I mean, they are famous for those adorable folded ears.
Very.
But that fold is not just a cute quirk. It is caused by a dominant genetic mutation that leads to osteochondrodysplasia, or OCD. It is a progressive skeleton-wide joint disease, basically a fundamental defect in how their cartilage forms.
So their entire skeletal system is just constantly inflamed.
Constantly.
If we stick to our tech analogy, the Scottish fold's body is like a computer running a corrupted software update that forces the internal cooling fans to shut down, so the system just starts to overheat.
Right, the hardware is running hot.
And in the cat, this overheating is chronic joint pain, which releases these things called pro-inflammatory cytokines into the bloodstream. But how do those cytokines, which the sources basically say are biological flare guns signaling inflammation, how do they actually scorch the beneficial gut bacteria like Faecalibacterium?
Well, cytokines alter the local environment of the tissue. When those inflammatory signals reach the gut lining, they trigger an immune response that changes the pH and the oxygen levels in the intestinal tract.
So the environment itself changes.
Yes, and beneficial bacteria like Faecalibacterium are highly sensitive to these changes. They thrive in a very specific, calm, low-oxygen environment. When the tissue becomes inflamed and hostile, those good bacteria literally cannot survive the altered microclimate. They just die off.
And without them, the inflammation just runs wild.
Yes, it does. And they aren't the only breed with unique vulnerabilities either. The data shows Maine Coons have a staggering 37-to-1 elevated risk for intestinal intussusception.
Intussusception. That's where the intestine literally telescopes into itself,
Sup-
right? Like pushing a sock inside out.
Yeah, it's a severe mechanical failure of the bowel. And Maine Coons suffer from it alongside high rates of chronic enteropathy, which is a persistent intestinal disease. Their microbiome is just inherently fragile.
Wow.
But, we can even pivot from physical traits to psychological ones, which brings us to the Siamese breed.
Siamese cats, they are highly vocal and famously anxious, so this is the stress-gut axis in action right here.
Exactly.
But I really want to understand the mechanics here. How does a feeling like literal anxiety in the brain, how does that kill a physical bacteria down in the stomach?
It all comes down to cortisol.
Yeah.
Siamese cats are predisposed to heightened stress reactivity. When they experience psychological stress, their brain signals the adrenal glands to flood the body with cortisol, the primary stress hormone.
The fight or flight chemical.
Right. And cortisol's main job in a fight or flight scenario is to divert blood flow away from non-essential systems like digestion and push it toward the muscles so the animal can escape.
So the gut is just suddenly starved of its normal blood supply.
Right. And with reduced blood flow, the gut produces less of the protective mucus that lines the intestinal walls. Now, that mucus is the primary home and food source for beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium.
Oh no, so their house just disappeared.
Yep. Without their habitat, they starve and die. So the psychological anxiety physically destroys the bacterial habitat. And worse, the lack of those good bacteria reduces the gut's ability to produce the neurotransmitter precursors we talked about earlier, the ones that actually calm the brain.
Another loop. The anxiety starves the bacteria, and the dead bacteria can't send the calm-down chemicals back up to the brain.
That's a vicious cycle.
Okay, but let's say a cat wins the genetic lottery, right? They aren't brachycephalic, their cartilage is perfect, and they're completely zen.
A lucky cat.
There is still one universal factor that will inevitably alter their microbiome: time. The aging process comes for every operating system eventually.
It really does. A 2026 study in Frontiers in Veterinary Science traced the microbial arc of feline aging, and it maps out a very clear trajectory. Kittens start out incredibly rich in bifidobacterium.
Which is good.
Very good. It's crucial for training their young immune systems not to overreact to every new protein they encounter. Then as they become young adults, they hit their peak microbial diversity.
Now, the sources mention a decline in alpha diversity when they hit senior status, which is around 7 years old. Let's define that for the listener. Are we talking about a healthy rainforest with hundreds of different species suddenly that's turning into just like a single crop cornfield?
That is an excellent way to visualize it. High alpha diversity means a rich, complex ecosystem that can withstand shocks. But in senior cats, that rainforest gets clear-cut.
Wow, clear cut.
Yeah, we see a sharp, measurable decline in that diversity. The foundational bacteria like Brevitella drop off significantly. Meanwhile, opportunistic pathogenic bacteria, specifically Escherichia shigella, begin to multiply and take over the newly emptied real estate.
Meaning the bad guys move in because the neighborhood watch is gone.
And this leads to a phenomenon called inflammaging.
Inflammaging.
Yes, it's a chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation caused directly by this senior-onset dysbiosis. The decay of the gut ecosystem continuously drips inflammatory signals into the bloodstream, which literally accelerates age-related diseases across the entire body.
That makes so much sense.
The fascinating part, though, is that veterinarians don't have to guess about this anymore. They can now objectively measure this decay using a tool called the Feline Dysbiosis Index, or DI.
Right, the source notes it's a qPCR-based test. So instead of just looking at a stool sample under a microscope and guessing, they're using molecular biology to amplify and count the exact DNA signatures of these bacteria.
Exactly.
So they get a hard number, like an index score, that tells them exactly how far the rainforest has degraded.
It completely moves veterinary medicine from subjective observation to objective data.
Okay, so if you have a cat at home, especially a senior cat, you're likely watching this inflammaging process happen in real time, even if their bowl is full and they seem completely fine.
It's invisible, but it's happening.
So we've mapped out the problems: the breed-specific hardware issues, the genetic coding errors, the anxiety loops, and the inevitable decay of time. How do we actually intervene to patch these vulnerabilities? Let's pivot to precision solutions. And the foundation, according to the sources, is diet.
Diet is absolutely the most powerful modifiable factor we have. For senior cats, high moisture wet food is non-negotiable.
Because of the kidneys.
Exactly. It supports kidney function by artificially increasing hydration, which we now know is critical to protecting the gut-kidney axis from those uremic toxins we talked about.
Okay.
The sources point to specific commercial formulations like Purina Pro Plan Prime Plus Senior 7 Plus, which is backed by nearly a decade of research into microbiome balance. There's also Raruva Senior, which incorporates pumpkin as a gentle prebiotic fiber to feed the good bacteria alongside green-lipped mussel powder.
Oh, which is huge for the Scottish folds.
Yeah.
Because the green-lipped mussel is a natural anti-inflammatory for their deteriorating joints.
Right, it targets their specific hardware bug.
But diet alone sometimes isn't enough to deliver like clinical therapeutic doses of these compounds. This is where targeted supplementation comes in. And our sources provided incredibly detailed visual and formulation data on a product called A+ Naturals Immunity Blend. And looking at the package design from the source material is actually a fascinating study in human marketing psychology versus feline biology.
Oh, how so?
Well, okay, so it comes in this crisp white tub, right, containing about 5.5 ounces of powder, like 150 grams. And the label has this very vibrant plant-based aesthetic. There's a golden retriever and a tabby cat on it.
A very natural look.
Yeah, the logo is clever too. It's a bold blue letter A that forms a medical cross in the negative space with the word "P eats" inside it. It visually screams holistic human wellness. But the powder inside is vegan bacon flavored.
Vegan bacon?
Right. It's wild because it's a plant-based aesthetic marketing to the human buyer's sensibilities, but deploying a synthetic meat flavor to trick the obligate carnivore into eating it.
That's a very clever workaround.
It is. And it also includes a clear plastic scoop, and the daily dose is exactly 1/3 of a scoop, completely regardless of the pet's weight, which tells me the active ingredients must have a very wide safety margin.
They do. It is a deliberate and highly functional formulation. If we break down the molecular mechanics behind the ingredients in that tub, it's operating on multiple pathways simultaneously.
Let's break it down.
Let's start with turmeric, specifically its active compound curcumin. The 2026 data confirms it's safe in feline diets up to 40 parts per million. Curcumin is powerful because it inhibits the NF-kappa B inflammatory pathway.
Okay, let's translate that for a second. NF-kappa B is essentially the master genetic switch for inflammation, right?
Exactly. When that switch gets flipped on, the body starts producing those biological flare guns, the cytokines. Curcumin physically blocks the switch from flipping.
Wow, so it stops the fire before it starts.
Yes. And when you combine that with the beta-glucans derived from the reishi and shiitake mushrooms in the blend, which modulate and calm the immune system, A+ Naturals becomes the highest priority intervention for breaking that severe inflammation dysbiosis cycle we see in the Scottish fold.
So it cools down the overheating hardware. But the formulation goes beyond just joints. The source notes it also contains astragalus.
Right. Astragalus is an adaptogenic herb that specifically supports renal blood flow and kidney filtration. So immediately, this ingredient makes the supplement highly relevant for the PKD-prone Persians, and the Abyssinians too, who are genetically at risk for renal amyloidosis.
It targets the kidney axis.
Exactly. And then you have ginger in the formula. Ginger directly solves the gastrointestinal motility issues caused by the brachycephalic anatomy of those flat-faced Persians.
Oh, because it speeds up the digestion?
Yes, it physically stimulates the stomach muscles to push the food through that compressed system, preventing the protein from lingering and fermenting into those rotting toxins.
That is brilliant. And it rounds all this out with Bacillus subtilis. The sources emphasize that this is a spore-forming probiotic. That seems like an important distinction because a cat's stomach acid is incredibly harsh, right? I mean, it's designed to dissolve raw meat and bone.
Extremely harsh, yes.
So most standard probiotics would just burn up and die in the stomach. But a spore-forming bacteria has this tough armor-like outer shell that lets it survive the acid bath. So it actually makes it down into the colon intact where it can wake up and do its job.
It guarantees delivery of the payload, basically.
That's perfect. But here's where it gets really interesting to me, and I appreciate the source material for being so objective about this. A+ Naturals is a fantastic multi-tool, but it is not a magic bullet for every single cat.
That is a crucial distinction. Precision medicine means acknowledging when an entirely different tool is required for a specific job.
Right. Like take the highly athletic Bengal breed. According to the research, they have a known genetic susceptibility to Trichomonas fetus, which is a nasty, highly resilient protozoal infection in the bowel.
Very hard to get rid of.
Yeah, so for Bengal, the source material actually recommends a completely different product, Vital Planet Floricat, as their primary line of defense, because that product has a massive 20 billion CFU count across 10 different bacterial strains.
Right. And it utilizes a mechanism called competitive exclusion.
Let's explain that, because on a microscopic level, competitive exclusion is essentially just a turf war, right?
It is a turf war. The gut only has so much physical space along the intestinal wall and only so many nutrients available. By dropping 20 billion beneficial bacteria into that environment, you're creating an overwhelming wall of good microbes.
They just crowd them out.
Exactly. They literally consume all the food and occupy all the physical parking spaces on the gut wall. So the Trichomonas pathogen enters the gut, finds no food and nowhere to attach, and simply gets flushed right out of the system.
So for the Bengals facing this specific threat, A+ Naturals gets relegated to more of a complementary anti-inflammatory role, while the massive probiotic acts as the main shield.
The interventions have to match the host's unique ecosystem. You can't just guess.
So what does this all mean for you listening? If we zoom all the way out to synthesize this journey, it means that understanding a cat's gut health requires moving far, far beyond that generic scoop of dry kibble.
The era of the standard combustion engine is over.
Completely over. It is entirely about precision care. It's about matching the unique physical hardware of their breed, the invisible genetic quirks in their code, and the undeniable realities of their age to the right moisture levels, the right prebiotic fibers, and the highly specific anti-inflammatory compounds they need to actually thrive.
It is a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And, exploring all of this raises an incredibly important question for the future of veterinary medicine.
Ooh, lay it on us.
Well, we know veterinarians can currently use the feline dysbiosis index to track exactly how a cat's microbiome decays with age, right?
Right, the DI score.
And we know the 2026 feline microbiome database is already identifying indigenous probiotic strains. These are bacteria derived directly from the guts of incredibly healthy, long-lived cats.
Oh, wow. I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, so how long until we aren't just managing our pets' digestive issues with external herbs and supplements, but actually using their own perfectly adapted indigenous microbes to effectively reverse engineer the aging process itself?
Oh, man. So the engine doesn't just run well, but it actually uses its own biological data to repair its own wear and tear from the inside out, keeping the system youthful indefinitely.
That's the direction we're heading.
That is an incredible frontier to think about. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we will catch you on the next one.